What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I am going to examine an issue of the X-Men. I will be examining X-Men issue 14, with story by Stan Lee, layouts by Jack Kirby, penciling by Jay Gavin, who I found out after I filmed my examination video for issue 13 that Jay Gavin is actually an alias for Werner Roth, who was a pretty big Silver Age artist who, for whatever reason, is using an alias in the credits here. I believe later on in this series he will start being credited as Werner Roth, but right now he's being credited as Jay Gavin. And then we have Vince Coletta on inking and Sam Rosen on lettering. This issue is pretty significant in X-Men history. It introduces Bolivar Trask and the Sentinels. We start off with the X-Men recovering from the attack by the Juggernaut. Professor Xavier still kind of sort of acting like they are his students, even though they graduated like 5 issues ago, but they're still living in the house, and he's still sending them out on missions, still giving them orders. So basically, nothing has changed after they graduated. Things are still pretty much exactly the same as they were when they were his students. So anyway, Professor X says that they get to go on vacation. This will be a nice little break for them. And Angel says that they haven't had a vacation in years, which is kind of not true. In the issue where the X-Men fought the Avengers while Professor X was a captive of Lucifer, in that issue they went on a cruise and they went to Europe. So yeah, even though they had to fight the Avengers, I would say that was kind of a vacation. Also, in the issue where they went to the Savage Land, Professor X straight up told them Kazar is not a mutant, but you guys can go anyway, it'll be good for your morale. I would say that was a vacation. So Angel saying they haven't been on a vacation in years, that's not really true. But anyway, they all get to go to their respective homes. We only get to see Angel actually talking with his parents a little bit. Everyone else, we don't really get to see what they do. I really would like to know what Scott was doing, because we will find out later on. I'm pretty sure we don't know at this point, but we will find out, I'd say in the next 10 issues, that Scott is an orphan. So I really have no idea where he would have gone, and I don't even think he knows that he has a younger brother at this point. So we get to see Angel. He goes home, and then pretty much as soon as everyone goes home, or some of them, actually Beast and Bobby, they don't even go home. They go to the Coffee A Go-Go, where we get to see Bernard the Poet, and we get to see Zelda again. Iceman tries to ask her out on a date. At first she's like, yeah, that'd be nice, and then he's like, well, sorry, gotta go, because Professor X sends out a mental summons to summon all the X-Men, and then Zelda is pretty angry at him. So anyway, why is Professor Xavier sending a summons? As soon as everyone leaves to go on vacation, Professor X looks at the newspaper and sees that Bolivar Trask is trying to start up a witch hunt against mutants. So Professor X, he sets up a live televised debate with Bolivar Trask, and we find out that Professor X is actually kind of famous, because whenever he sets up this debate, they're like, yeah, we definitely want someone of your celebrity and your stature on here debating this guy. So Professor X, nobody knows that he is the leader of the X-Men, but people apparently know of him in the education world. So that's kind of interesting, and that's an aspect that gets carried over at least until the early 2000s. I believe when Cassandra Nova had possessed Charles Xavier in Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, and she outed Professor X as the leader of the X-Men, she was doing it in the guise of Charles Xavier as an education expert. So he was a celebrity who was then saying, by the way, I also founded the X-Men. That was kind of what happened there. So this is kind of an important development in Charles Xavier's backstory, that not only did he fight in Korea, and he graduated from college at a really young age, like 16 or something like that, not only all of that, but he's also really well known in the field of education. And here he's apparently an expert on mutants. And I think it's really cool that Charles is trying to fight this fire before it actually becomes a big deal. He wants to see if he can calm the flames of persecution against mutants. I think that's kind of neat, and he doesn't immediately call the X-Men until Bolivar Trask says, well, I'm going to introduce you guys to the Sentinels. And they come out, and literally one page after they're introduced, actually I think it's the page that they are introduced, they immediately turn on Bolivar Trask. They say they do not take orders, and the best way to protect humanity, which is what they were created to do, the best way to protect humanity is to take over humanity and make sure that they don't hurt themselves also. So anyway, the Sentinels, they kind of take over the TV station, and then the X-Men come and they fight one of the Sentinels. All the other Sentinels, they briefly fight Angel while he's on his way to the TV station, and then they all basically just give up and fly away. But they took Bolivar Trask with them, and we also get to see, I forgot to mention this earlier, when Angel is getting ready to leave and go home, he tells Iceman that he was actually in military school before he joined the X-Men, and I had completely forgot about that. I don't think that that aspect of his character has ever been brought up again. He doesn't really seem like the type to join the military. He seems like a rich snob who, in the 1960s, if he was drafted, he seems like the kind of guy who who would have paid to get out of going to the war or go to Canada or something like that. He really doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would actually join the military. Now, the X-Men is a combat unit. They do see a lot of battle, but it's not nearly as dangerous as actual war with gunfire and bombs, etc. Nothing that the X-Men have done up until this point has been nearly as death-defying as anything that Angel might have done if he had joined the military. So it's a little weird that he was in military school. I didn't know that. Maybe in military school, maybe he was planning on doing something that wouldn't involve combat. I don't really think that you can choose what you do in the military, but I don't know a whole lot about that. But he just doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would actually fight in the army. But if he was doing something like, I don't know, radar or something like that. I don't know. I could see him maybe doing something like that, but even then, it just doesn't seem like part of his character. But that's an interesting aspect that is introduced here, and I don't think it's ever brought up again. But anyway, when all the X-Men get together, Professor X says that he is able to sense some thought patterns from the Sentinel, which is really weird because the Sentinel is a mechanical being, and earlier, Professor X was not able to use his telepathy to stop the Sentinel, but then once it has been brought down, and they don't know why it just fell down by itself. Once it falls down, suddenly he's able to read the Sentinel's mind and find out that there's this thing called the Master Mold, and it's about an hour away, and so the X-Men, they go to try and find the secret base of the Sentinels, and it turns out it's underground, and then these cannons shoot up out of the ground and start shooting at the X-Men. And that is about all that happens here. This is at least a two-parter. I think it's actually a three-parter now that I think of it. So this is the longest story that we have had in the X-Men so far, and this is, like I said, pretty significant because the Sentinels will continue to be a huge deal for the rest of time. And it's interesting that Bolivar Trask, even when he sees that the Sentinels are incredibly dangerous and cannot be controlled by him, he hasn't quite given up on the idea that the Sentinels would be a good way to protect humanity from mutants. And we see at one point when Cyclops is on his way to the TV station, he keeps telling the cab driver, "Hurry up, this is an emergency," and then Cyclops somehow accidentally drops his ruby quartz goggles, and then he shoots a big hole through the cab, and then an angry mob assembles and chases after him, and then they give up because it's like, hey, wait a minute, he could kill us with those death beams coming out of his eyes. But it's really weird that Cyclops was so careless with his goggles just happening to come off, and it says that at one point the cab turned on two wheels, and I don't see how any taxi cab, even if your fare keeps telling you that it's an emergency, I don't see how you could be going that fast. I feel like you'd be like, okay, we're going 80 miles an hour, that's enough, I'm not going to risk your life to get you wherever you're going, so just sit back and enjoy the ride, kid. But anyway, that was kind of an interesting thing to happen in an issue that has the most human persecution against mutants so far. We've seen a little bit of that in the series to date. We saw that issue where an angry mob chased after Iceman and Beast, the issue to introduce Eunice the Untouchable, and we've seen just bits and pieces here and there, but this is the one that really hammers it home, that humans, or at least a human, is afraid enough to build these giant killer robots and is charismatic enough to get everyone else to fear mutants and buy into his idea that they need the Sentinels. So this is a huge development in the world of the X-Men, and also we get to see things from the human's point of view, because when Cyclops carelessly blasts a giant hole through the roof of this cab, yeah, that guy might think that this mutant is trying to kill him, that he suddenly blasted a hole in the cab. Why is this mutant doing what he's doing? So the humans are afraid of the X-Men, or afraid of mutants anyway, and in some ways they have a right to be, because this is very scary. Some of the things that they do are very terrifying, and there is nothing to stop the mutants from doing whatever they want to do. The human population is just lucky that the X-Men don't want to overthrow humanity and take over. Like there's this newspaper that Bolivar Trask actually put his ideas forward in a newspaper, and that's when Charles sees that Bolivar Trask is doing this, and there are these pictures of what an artist thinks a mutant would look like, and he has like a whip and he's whipping humans and has turned them into slaves, and that picture actually is brought back in Joe Casey's Uncanny X-Men run, and also in Grant Morrison's New X-Men run. And in the Uncanny X-Men run, it says that this issue took place 18 years before Joe Casey's Uncanny X-Men run. The very first issue of Casey's X-Men run is 18 years after this issue that introduces the Sentinels. And I don't think that that quite adds up. I don't think that the Marvel Universe is quite that old. Franklin Richards is not even 15 years old, and he was born just a year or two after this comic came out. I don't know exactly when Franklin Richards was born, but that's a good marker if you look at how old he is and then look at how long the Marvel Universe has been going on, because he isn't quite as old as the entire entire Marvel Universe since Fantastic Four issue 1, but that's a pretty good way of measuring just how much time has passed. And the X-Men are not almost 40 at this point. I would say the original 5 X-Men, they are, at most, they're probably in their very early 30s, but if all of them are 18 or 16 as of this issue, and then there's 18 years later, that doesn't quite add up. I don't think that that works, but anyway, that's a problem, or an inconsistency, if you will, with Joe Casey's Uncanny X-Men run. Not necessarily a problem here. But we also get to see that newspaper clipping when Quentin Quire is forming his gang in the latter half of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run. So this is a newspaper clipping that's kind of important. But anyway, we get to see that a lot of humans kind of have a right to be a little bit afraid, because as far as they're concerned, these mutants at any point could decide, we're going to take over the world, and there wouldn't really be anything to stop them. Now, of course, you would have superheroes like the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, but these guys have no idea if those guys are as reliable as they claim to be, because a lot of the adventures that these guys go on, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, Joe Schmo and the public isn't going to know about all the stuff that they do. So Trask is basically saying, we need something that specifically exists to protect us from the mutant menace. And we also get to see, at one point, Beast says something like, I need my powers, otherwise I would be just a mere human being, or a mere Homo sapien. And Professor X says, hey, that's a little bit racist, don't say that. And so we get to see it from both angles, and I think that's kind of cool. So a really huge, really significant issue in terms of stuff that happens in X-Men history, and we will get to see more of the Sentinels in next issue. So I think that's about all that I have to say. We did get to see a little bit of the Jean, Cyclops, Angel love triangle. Cyclops is thinking about going and talking to Jean, asking her if she wants to go out to town, but Angel beats him to it, and then Cyclops is like, you guys go ahead, I know we're all going to the train station, but I'm going to go at a later time. And so we get to see a little bit more of that. Angel is really clueless. We find out here that he doesn't seem to understand that Scott has a thing for Jean. I was under the impression that Angel did know, and he was just being a little bit of a jerk, and he was just trying to cut him off and beat him to the punch. So here, Angel is thinking like, the way Scott was looking at Jean, I wonder if there's anything there. So he apparently didn't know that Scott had a thing for Jean, at least as of this issue. We've seen that kind of contradicted in later stories like X-Men Season 1, which all takes place during the events when the Brotherhood of Mutants was active, and in that, Angel definitely knew that Scott had a thing for Jean, but here he does not seem to know at this time. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this issue. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will try to be back later this week with an examination of another issue of the X-Men. In the meantime, consider this issue examined.